Des fois je rêve que je suis dans tes bras et qu'à l'oreille tu me parles tout bas. Tu dis des choses qui font fermer les yeux. Et moi je trouve ça merveilleux.
Welcome to Deep Focus. I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And tonight we're talking about Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan.
From 1998.
Yeah, it's been over 20 years already. I can't believe that.
It has a lot of staying power still. I mean, I don't feel like it's been outdone in terms of what it set out to do as battles and a war movie. It seems like everything still kind of is under its shadow.
Yeah, it's really a watershed film, right? I mean, I think of this film as the picture that brought war films to a new level of realism. And I think that's how it's going to go down in history. I think audiences didn't quite know what to expect when they experienced this. At least
so
I felt
I
it
went and
the
saw
first
it
time.
opening weekend in the theater. I remember it was a completely packed crowd, and it was a huge hit. I mean, I think it was the top box office draw for 1998, and it was obviously a critical success too. But I still remember it had an overwhelming feeling. I remember that opening D-Day scene, having this sense the audience was just kind of, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. And sometimes even like kind of nervous laughter. I remember a couple people in the theater just laughing at some of the, specifically when the guy gets his head shot out. Just
After he takes out the helmet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just nobody had seen anything quite that level of detail and graphicness that I think that people were just kind of blown away by it. It is, like you said, a watershed film, at least in terms of the way it was filmed. As far as the story, probably not so much. But for the filmmaking, yes.
Yeah, the filmmaking, absolutely. The filmmaking is what really stands out here and how this film will be remembered, I think. And we can get into the plot specifics more later, but we really should focus in on that opening sequence, the D-Day sequence on Omaha Beach. It's what everybody talks about with this film.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, feel that it's the strongest part of the film in many ways. And maybe the film...
Everybody was aware
really,
that this was going to be something they walked into, that the first 27 minutes, just get ready for it, because it was being hyped beyond hype. And I think there was a question, to me at least, would it actually live up to that hype? And as I watched it, I was like, yep, it did.
Yeah.
I think it was a brilliant decision to have that scene there as far as the impact on the audience. Probably not a great way of actually establishing the story. But still, for just throwing you into the sense of World War II, and maybe even, I think, actually getting you just to kind of buy into the fact that this is really a pretty absurd story. But because you ground it in such an intense, visceral experience right off the bat, you kind of go with wherever the movie's going to go afterwards, that it plays to the film's benefit as far as it relates to the audience.
Yeah, it's an incredible opening. I remember vividly the first time I experienced that, and you're placed in those Higgins boats with the troops, and you don't know what you're going to be experiencing till that door drops. And when you see those men just get obliterated, you know that this is Spielberg's taking this very seriously. And of course,
we're not going to be doing a repeat of The Longest Day.
No, yeah. Of course, this comes after Schindler's List, so Spielberg is no stranger to realistic violence, certainly in the setting of World War II. And I think we have to mention Schindler's List as informing this picture in many ways. Spielberg is very interested in World War II. He grew up.
Many of his movies are about World War II. I mean, all the way through his whole career, really.
Yeah, ones you wouldn't necessarily remember, like
1941.
Empire of the Sun. So
even the Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah, it looms large over his catalog for sure. And even his early films as a child were war pictures. So this is something that's very dear to him to get right, I think.
This movie, I think, couldn't be made today this way, because it was made it's very much, as I'm watching it again, it's very much from its era of the late 1990s. America was very much in a victorious spirit at that time. It was shortly after the 50th anniversary of D-Day. So obviously there was just a lot of veterans sharing their stories still, and Spielberg's own father was a veteran of World War II. So I think, if you consider this in relation to something like Schindler's List, that's a little bit more despairing at times. It's a little less flashy. It's obviously extremely well made. I mean, I'm not trying to diminish that movie at all, but this particular film also plays a lot more like a journey or a story, and so it has a natural, more compelling, interesting, entertaining component than I think that Schindler's List does. And that opening battle scene really is, I think, a tribute to Spielberg's talents as a director.
Yeah, there's clear geography. Even though it's a very chaotic and intense sequence, it does take the time to introduce us to the characters, or to most of the characters that we follow along for the rest of the film. Of course, there isn't a lot of time for characterization necessarily, but I mean, Tom Hanks as Captain Miller, he's the primary focus.
You learn about Sergeant Horvath, Tom Sizemore's character, and you get the sense that he's going to be a good second, in command, kind of, that you get, this guy knows what he's doing. He's able to be a little bit more gruff and help Captain Miller. Yeah, and you can tell they have a relationship already too. So it does manage to make some of those connections, I think, with the audience in terms of, okay, here are our main characters. Here are the people we're going to be following. Private Jackson's introduced as well as a sniper and his skills. So it's impressive that the film can, or that opening can be so powerful and so intense, but still manage to be our gateway into the rest of the story. Part of that's also because they did cast, Tom Hanks was, of course, at this time, one of the, if not the biggest movie stars. Yeah. He'd done Philadelphia, Forrest Gump, Apollo 13. Of course, he'd also been romantic comedies like Sleepless in Seattle. So he was very much, everybody liked him. He was that kind of actor. And so the fact that he's in there, okay, Tom Hanks is the main character just because it's Tom Hanks. And so that allows us to, understand some things. So casting is incredibly important here too, in terms of being able to make these connections for us as an audience and helping us to be guided through that opening battle scene. Janusz Kaminski's cinematography is pretty legendary in this film. As you said, it introduced the world to shaky cam in many ways. Of course, other films had done that before, but to a whole new level here. And war films after this visually would never be the same. So many films tried to copy this film stylistically. And not even just war films, but I think of something like the movie Narc, which nobody probably remembers. Go check it out. Actually, it's a pretty good police movie. Yeah, Joe Carnahan. Joe Carnahan. And Ray Liotta has a really good supporting role in it too. But the aesthetic is identical to this. It's so infiltrated. All things Soderbergh even picked up, I think, from this and did a lot of things after it. Yeah, Traffic is, I think, influenced by it. But the bleach bypass process, so leaving the silver on the film emulsion, gives that very distinct look to it. Lenses were stripped of protective coatings, so there were a lot of lens flares, blooming backgrounds, very grainy film as well. So there's I think, an intent to bring the quality of combat photography to this film. I think that was what they were going for. Colors are desaturated, but at the same time, it's very effective, and it doesn't feel too stylized. It's stylized, but it's a real feat, right? That you can create a highly stylized. It is highly stylized, objectively speaking. But it's not conspicuous. But you don't actually pick up on the style as you're watching it. Yeah. So the 45-degree shutter that creates that staccato appearance during much of the action. So when explosions occur, we're seeing those little specific bits of dirt and debris. And just the movement of the men as they're going through is just so sharp and kind of a little jagged. Yeah, it's almost like sports photography, right. And you lose that motion blur and you get more of a sense of realism. So yeah, visually definitely a landmark film as well. Well, the rest of the film is, as you said, very much a journey. It's very much akin to the Odyssey. A series of things that happen, so to speak, until we get to that final battle in Rommel. Right. So your basic premise of the plot is these 4 Ryan brothers from Iowa. 3 of them have died. We see that one of them has died in the Normandy invasion. Based on a true story, actually, of the Nyland brothers. Yep. 4 brothers. They thought 3 had died, but only 2 had died. 1 was actually in captivity by the Japanese. Right. And they went in and found the 4th brother and got him out. I don't think it was as
extraordinary of a tale as what we're seeing here, but it's based on true events.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat inspired by it, but at the same time, I don't think General Marshall, a couple days after you just invaded Europe, is going to be taking the time to be reading a letter from Abraham Lincoln. But yeah, we have then basically the hunt for this one man, and it does raise a little bit of the question of like, okay, what is this really about? If you're having this big war and you're trying to find one man, that's, I guess, the thematic crux of the movie.
Yeah.
For the most part, effective, but at times a little distracting. Some casting decisions are a little like Ted Danson. It just kind of like
comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, and just because it's a bit part that doesn't really mount to anything. You're just like, why is he there? Dennis Farina has a little bit part. Why is he there? You know, Paul Giamatti at the time wasn't really known, so he wasn't distracting at that time. But now watching again, I was like, what's Paul Giamatti doing in this movie, right? So there is a little bit of distraction that comes from some of the casting. Nathan Fillion even is in it. Which, by the way, this is just a fun little thing. We're Minnesotans, by the way, people. And when I saw this in the theater and he said, I'm from Minnesota, everybody in the theater was like, oh, Minnesota! Because Minnesotans evidently don't expect to ever be in movies in any shape or form.
No, we always have kind of a chip on our shoulder.
So it was a very embarrassing moment in the middle of the movie. It's like,
James Frederick Ryan, Minnesota.
Okay, but there's but yeah, it's the set pieces, I think, are most of them pretty good.
They're very effective.
Yeah.
I mean, the sniper sequence early on is pretty powerful in the rain. Visually, the sound design is extraordinary in that sequence.
This highlights one of the great truths of cinema, and we've talked about this when we did our podcast for the Criterion Chat on Andrzej Wajda's Ashes and Diamonds, how just decay is very cinematic, right?
Yeah.
So you have this broken down, bombed out city that is just visually very rich to have this sniper scene.
Yeah, and they're trying to help that family, right? So pretty powerful imagery there, especially with the little girl hiding behind the car. And Spielberg knows how to use that to full effect. And we start to lose characters, right, in this scene. So Caparzo gets shot. I guess that's an issue I have with this film is at this point it starts to feel fairly standard in terms of the progression of it.
Robert Rodak is the screenwriter.
Yeah.
Besides this and The Patriot, I can't think of anything else he's written.
Well, and I've read...
And I don't think he wrote a good screenplay, to be honest.
I've read an early draft of this screenplay, and it was actually fairly different from the film. It's a very basic screenplay. It's very straightforward. There's really nothing extraordinary about it. I mean, I think Spielberg probably saw the potential in it, and later drafts certainly fleshed it out more, and
but
Spielberg's direction elevates it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty weak, and I think, again, if you would cut out the D-Day scene, start with just, hey, we're just, having this mission to go save a guy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would have been like, this is really routine, uninteresting, uninspired film.
You have kind of your rote soldier characters, right? Each one kind of has their own little...
Raven with the Brooklyn,
their own little characteristics and their own
Upham
little
is
ticks.
the fish out of water kind of...
Yeah,
I don't know what I'm
he's
doing.
the surrogate for the audience, right? Which we typically have to have. And what is interesting about it is Spielberg does use a fairly straightforward story to reveal certain details about the Normandy invasion in after D-Day. So we get little glimpses of the different kinds of combat that were taking place, right? So the urban combat, we have battles that are out in the country. Yeah, the glider crash. So we got to see some of the effects of the D-Day invasion that you don't necessarily see very often. And that was later fleshed out even more in Band of Brothers. We should also mention that this film kind of inspired a whole, I don't want to...
There was a revival of World War II movies that came after this, for sure.
Kind of a cottage industry. I mean, not to make it sound exploitative, but...
Hearts War, what else has there been? I mean, there's been tons. Yeah.
But Band of Brothers and The Pacific are definitely spiritual successors to this film. Of course, Hanks and Spielberg were both heavily involved in those projects. But yeah, back to the story itself, and the radar site. That's probably one of the most heartbreaking deaths in the film.
Yeah.
When the medic...
well, in part because they set up... So there's that earlier scene where they're taking shelter in the church, which is one of my favorite of the noteworthy scenes, just, a simple, good, well-done scene. is how you get to see the characters as they're in the church. You get a little bit of the sense, Jackson is asleep. He's perfectly clear conscience, not worried about the mission, completely sleeps like a baby. The others are talking and just kind of debating, what is this about? And, there's just that story that Wade then shows or tells about his mom, waiting up for his mom and then falling asleep, and then sometimes he would be awake, but he wouldn't speak to her, right? You can tell there's something that's a wound that he's carrying about that. And then you see later on when he dies, how that comes back in that moment. It just makes it all the more devastating. Which, my grandpa was, as I'm sure obviously many of our generation, it's kind of, this is our grandfather's war. My grandpa was a doctor in World War II, and he said that every soldier as they died was asking for their mom. I think what I like about the way Spielberg handles some of the themes and the violence in this movie, but he dials it back at certain key points. Spielberg will actually pull it back, and sometimes you get just these very chilling things that are very simple. Wade is shot, and he's bleeding, and he's dying, and there's really nothing you can do about it. It's not anything big, it's not anything epic. It just is forcing you to look at a young man dying from a gunshot.
Well, Spielberg is very conscious of making each death as impactful as possible. I think, after the opening...
I should say each American death.
True.
The radar scene is both, on one level, it has that great highlight of just kind of why are they doing this mission, but it also strikes me as it's a little bit of the weakest part of the movie too. Because
it's a very preachy part of the movie.
Yeah, it has the Oscar speech, my mission's to get home to my wife kind of thing. If this gets me home, then that's my mission kind of thing. But it also comes out of nowhere. Like, we're just going to flirt with kind of a My Lai-esque situation and then pull it back just enough and say, okay, they did the right thing at the end. I think it feels like it wants to create sort of a drama and a tension that it hasn't earned in that particular scene.
Well, and of course that German soldier comes back at the end to shoot Tom Hanks of all people.
Because it's entertainment. Spielberg wants to entertain, right? We have to have it come back.
It does. That part always kind of bothered me. It's just a little too on the nose. So when they do reach Rommel, they do find Private Ryan. And
Matt Damon in a very early role after Good Will Hunting, but before he was a big star.
He does a good job for the little bits that he has, especially that interaction, that scene where Edith Piaf is playing in the background and he's talking with Captain Miller about the last time he saw his brothers.
I think the original script, they had a big, long Oscar speech again for Miller to talk about his wife and the rose bushes, and it was Tom Hanks that decided, cut that out. He wouldn't share that with him.
Tell me about your wife and those rose bushes.
No. No, that one I saved just for me.
And that's one of the best moments in the film, actually.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I love his delivery of that line. And then, so Private Ryan refuses to leave with them. He wants to stay with the only brothers he has left, his fellow soldiers in the airborne.
And I liked Riven's little, because it's him being kind of a little sanctimonious himself, and Riven saying to him,
Barely hardly enough of this.
Two of our guys already died trying to find you, all right?
Sir. That's right.
But ultimately, Miller and Company decide to stay and help defend this bridge.
the battle scene at the end is better than the opening D-Day as an overall piece of filmmaking.
I would agree with that. Spielberg, it's more challenging in terms of all the locations.
It's a lot more complicated. Spielberg introduces it because he does smart. So he has them kind of walk through and get the sense of it. What do you have? What are your supplies? So they get all the information.
You know where each character is located.
Then he goes through and he explains the strategy. And then again, they go and they have their moments, the Edith Piaf. There's a little bit of humor that comes in every now and again. This is one thing the film does also, is it brings in little bits of levity, the coffee and all that Miller's trying to get. And you have that throughout the movie to lighten the burden, I suppose, a little bit for the audience. But then when the Germans are coming off in the distance, they again go through and circle through the whole town. So we now have seen this a couple of times as an audience. So when the violence and the chaos of the battle actually ensues, we still very are grounded in where we're supposed to be in the geography of it all.
And I think the most disturbing death of the entire film is during that scene or that sequence
With Mellish.
With Mellish, I have a very, very hard time watching that.
Especially because the German soldier, and I don't remember the exact translation of it right now off the top of my head, but as I was watching it again, I think a lot of people assume the German soldier is basically saying something terrible to him. He's not. He's actually trying to say, just give up. It's over. Just make this easy for us both. It's not like this villainous thing. It's kind of like, this is where he went, and sorry, it's not the villain. The German is the great villain, which is an even more kind of devastating thing when you actually know what the German's saying to him, that you go like, ooh, there's a kind of a stripping of the humanity of the enemy as well.
Yeah. But unfortunately, Captain Miller does get shot by the very German that they let go, which again is still
Hollywoodish.
Exactly. It does come across as the screenwriter special. And the battle is stopped by the arrival of the P-51s, and really brings the battle to an end. And we get, a very powerful scene between Miller and Private Ryan. The way that sequence is shot is very powerful too. Just that one very flat, kind of wide shot of Captain Miller dead on the ground and Private Ryan standing over him always stands out to me. It's such a simple shot. It looks so plain, but it's a very bleak shot.
I was never thrilled with the ending, to be honest. The pulling him down and saying, earn this, right? It strikes me as a little too on the nose, and it gets a little bit more to the hagiography of The Greatest Generation, which was in vogue at the time. It's definitely the patriotic fervor that would have been a part of, again, late 90s America. But I always felt like it seems a little shoehorned in, and it's this big message, I guess, for all of us, like, wow, this is what men went through for us, and therefore we have to earn it by the way we live our lives. And I don't think that's a bad theme by any stretch of the imagination, but it just seems a little too on the nose for me. And then even switching it back then when they go back to really the actual opening scenes, what we find out is Private Ryan.
The cemetery.
Yeah.
So you have the bookends.
by the way, that always bothered me, that they clearly cheat. They make it seem like it's Miller with the way they zoom in, and then they zoom in on Miller later on, all these things. And it's like, nope, it isn't. It's Riven all along. That's just a little bit of a cheat.
Yeah, Spielberg was trying to do a switcheroo on the audience and make everyone go, oh, Spielberg likes to do that. He likes to kind of throw in those little surprises. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have the American flag bookends. Mm-hmm. So it's a very, as you said, it's a very patriotic film. It's very on the nose in many ways. It doesn't have the thematic depth as like something like
Bridge on the River Kwai
came out the same year.
Which we did a podcast on that for anybody who wants to subscribe to our on iTunes or SoundCloud.
Yeah, and as you know, Thinner Line is my favorite film of all time. So
and the better film of the two.
But to me, it's apples and oranges. I know a lot of people do compare that film to this one. They both came out the same year. That's probably the only reason why people compare them. And it's kind of an unfair comparison. They're two different films. They're trying to do different things. Private Ryan, it will stand the test of time in terms of its place in Hollywood history. I think more on its technical merits than anything else. Yeah. And it's an important picture. Yeah,
I think that's a good word for it. It's an important picture. It is, of all of Spielberg's work, I don't think it's his best film, but it is by far, I think, his most innovative and influential film. I mean, you see movies are different because of Saving Private Ryan. They're not so much different because of Schindler's List. They're not so much different because of E.T.
Yeah.
Right? They changed. Movies changed because of this. You have the one guy who's praying the rosary on the beach. And this is for anybody who knows Latin. You'll go watch this movie because he's only praying the first part of the Hail Mary. Then he just stops and he doesn't say the last piece, which would be Nunc et ora mortis nostrae, which is now at the hour of our death. We're like, that needs to be there. You need to know your Latin because you need to know it is their hour of death. Like you need to have that in there. So little Spielberg needs to study his Latin a little bit.